Welcome in. It's so great to have you sitting down with us today.
Yeah, really glad you could join the conversation.
Because looking at the materials you sent over, it's pretty clear what you're aiming for here. You are looking for a quick, thorough synthesis of information,
Right.
a way to bypass the overwhelming noise of raw data and just, get straight to the insights.
Exactly, those genuine aha moments without having to spend hours cross-referencing footnotes.
Yes, exactly. And we are thrilled you're here because diving into these exact kinds of sources and extracting the narrative well, that's exactly what we do.
It really is. And there's a specific kind of satisfaction in taking a document that appears at first glance completely dry or purely administrative
Oh, yeah.
and teasing out the human element that actually built it.
And the source material today is basically the ultimate test of that. We are looking at a Wikipedia article.
A very long Wikipedia article.
Right, specifically the list of United States senators from Louisiana. And if you just pull this up on your screen, it is just a wall of historical data.
Yeah, rows, columns, dates, party affiliations.
Brief footnotes, yeah, it's a strictly formatted grid. But, okay, let's unpack this, because hiding inside this rigid spreadsheet is a wildly dramatic narrative.
It really is.
I mean, we are looking at unbridled ambition, massive historical upheaval, bizarre political stalemates, and honestly, the very real physical toll of public service.
Because when you look closely at the anomalies in the data, a simple list of names and dates essentially maps out the entire institutional evolution of a state, and by extension, the broader political machinery of the country.
Yeah, to kick things off, I want to pull a highly counterintuitive piece of modern trivia straight from the top of this article.
Oh, the seniority thing.
Yes, this is so interesting. So Louisiana's current Senate delegation consists of two Republicans, Bill Cassidy and John Kennedy.
Right.
Cassidy is listed as the senior senator, and Kennedy is the junior senator. But the source notes that Louisiana is one of only 15 states where the senior senator, in this case Cassidy, is actually younger in age than the junior senator Kennedy.
What's fascinating here is how the text structures the timeline to reflect the Senate's continuous nature. Because the founders staggered Senate elections into 3 continuous classes, a newly admitted state like Louisiana had to be, well, awkwardly retrofitted into the existing system.
Right, they didn't just start fresh.
Exactly. Specifically, they were slotted into Class 2 and Class 3. The source notes that Class 2 senators belonged to the electoral cycle contested in years like 2014 and 2020.
While Class 3 aligns with 2016 and 2022.
Right. And that foundational staggering dictates the rhythm of every single data point we are about to explore.
And that rhythm gets off to a remarkably chaotic start.
To say the least.
If you look at the very top of the timeline, Louisiana officially becomes a state on April 30th, 1812.
Okay.
You would naturally assume a brand new state would be, I don't know, eager to seat its representatives in Washington immediately.
You would think so, yeah.
Instead, the table just shows a blank space. It literally says vacant from April 30 to September 3, 1812.
Wow.
It takes them 4 full months to actually fill the seats.
And the data shows that even when they do manage to fill a seat, the commitment is practically non-existent.
That is the understatement of the century.
Right.
The very first person listed in Class 2 is Jean-Noël Destrehan, representing St. Charles Parish. He takes office on September 3rd, 1812.
Okay.
By October 1st, 1812, the table notes that he resigns. He lasted under 30 days.
Looking at this strictly as a data point, a 28-day tenure in a federal legislative body is absurd.
It's basically a long vacation.
Yeah, and it implies an entirely different set of priorities regarding what the Senate represented to politicians at the time.
It sets a massive pattern that dominates the entire first half of the 19th century data. Scanning down this table from 1812 through the 1850s, the Senate looks less like a prestigious destination and much more like a temporary waiting room.
Right.
The sheer volume of senators resigning to take other jobs is staggering.
It completely challenges our modern assumption that a U.S. Senate seat is the pinnacle of a political career. The footnotes in this table paint a picture of a chamber that was constantly being abandoned for local or diplomatic postings.
Yeah, let's track some of these specific resignations because the career trajectories are fascinating. You have Henry Johnson, who resigns his Senate seat in 1824 to become the governor of Louisiana.
Oh.
Decades later, William Pitt Kellogg does the exact same thing, resigning in 1872 to become governor.
So going back to state-level politics.
Right. Then you look at someone like Edward Livingston from New Orleans. Elected in 1829, serves just a couple of years before resigning in 1831 to become the U.S. Secretary of State.
Notice the shift in jurisdiction there. Going from a federal legislative role back to a state executive role, or jumping to a cabinet position, suggests that real actionable power wasn't perceived to be housed in the Senate chamber.
And it wasn't just domestic power they were chasing either. The diplomatic corps pulls multiple senators right out of their seat.
Oh, the overseas postings?
Yes. James Brown had already served one term, gets elected again in 1819, and then resigns in 1823 to become the U.S. minister to France.
Wow.
Pierre Soulet is elected in 1848, and by 1853, he drops the Senate seat to become the U.S. minister to Spain.
Just jumping ship.
And jumping slightly ahead to 1894, Edward Douglas White leaves his seat to become a justice on the United States Supreme Court. The text portrays an institution really struggling to retain its own members.
While ambition certainly explains a good portion of that revolving door, the text also reveals a much darker reason for the high turnover.
Yeah, it does.
The sheer cluster of died in office and ill health notes in the 19th century columns paints a pretty grim picture of the physical toll of public service during that era.
It is incredibly bleak to read. You have William C.C. Claiborne, elected in 1817 and dies that very same year.
Right.
Alexander Burrough is elected in 1840 and dies in 1846. But the ones that truly underscore the physical peril are Charles Gaillaret and Alexander Porter.
Their entries are particularly revealing regarding the logistics of the time.
Right, because the text notes that Charles Gaillaret was elected in 1835. But he resigned due to ill health before he could even take his seat.
He never even made it.
Never made it. And Alexander Porter, who had actually served a previous term, gets elected again in 1843. The table states, and this is a quote, "due to ill health, did not take his seat." And then he simply died.
Gosh.
They endured the election process, won, and then physically could not make it to Washington.
We don't have their medical charts in this Wikipedia article, obviously, but we don't need them to see the systemic issue.
No, the data is enough.
When a single data table features this high a density of early mortality and physical collapse among elite elected officials, the data itself implies that the baseline conditions of travel and service were brutal. The Senate seat wasn't just politically volatile, it was a genuine physical hazard.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We move from individual physical collapse to the total collapse of the federal system itself.
The Civil War.
Exactly. As you trace the timeline into the 1860s, you hit a visual chasm in the grid.
It is the most striking feature of the entire document. You have this steady, rhythmic charting of staggered terms, and then the machinery completely halts.
In February 1861, the text shows that both of Louisiana senators, Judah P. Benjamin and John Slidell, withdrew from the Senate.
Right.
Benjamin withdraws on February 4th, and Slidell withdraws simultaneously. This, historically, aligns with Louisiana's secession.
Right.
But what the table documents next is staggering. From February 4, 1861 until July 1868, the seats are entirely vacant.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a spreadsheet usually represents continuous data.
Right.
A null value for over 7 years in a continuous legislative body is a structural anomaly that the table presents with chilling neutrality. The electoral history column simply reads, Civil War and Reconstruction.
That one phrase covers nearly a decade where a state had absolutely zero representation in the federal government.
Just a total blank.
But what really caught my eye is that even after representatives are finally seated again in 1868, the administrative chaos is far from over. Just a few years later, the table records a bizarre 3-year vacancy.
This is the situation involving the rival claimants.
Yes.
Which is a fundamentally different kind of breakdown than a wartime withdrawal.
Exactly. From November 1872 until January 1876, the Class 3 seat sits completely vacant. But the reason listed isn't secession, and it isn't death.
Right.
The text states, Senate declined to seat rival claimants William L. McMillan and PBS Pinchback.
Think about the institutional paralysis implied by that note.
It's wild.
For over 3 years, 2 different men claimed the electoral right to that single seat. Rather than resolving the dispute, the data shows the United States Senate simply threw its hands up and left the state partially unrepresented.
Just walked away from it.
It is a catastrophic administrative failure, documented as a mere footnote.
It really shifts your perspective on how fragile the system was. You have a 7-year void caused by war, followed almost immediately by a 3-year void caused by sheer political gridlock.
Yeah.
But as we move out of the 19th century and into the 1930s, the entire nature of this timeline undergoes a massive transformation. We leave behind the era of the revolving doors and vacant seats, and we enter the era of the longs and the rise of entrenched political dynasties.
The contrast is stark. The data stop showing brief, fragmented tenures and begin showcasing decades of concentrated control.
The perfect transition point for this is the timeline of Huey Long. The table lists Huey Long from Baton Rouge as being elected to the Senate in 1930.
Right, 1930.
But it notes that he didn't actually assume the office until January 25, 1932.
Over a year later.
The reason? He just continued to serve as the governor of Louisiana in the interim.
That entry alone speaks volumes about the concentration of power. To hold a federal legislative seat essentially on layaway for over a year while maintaining executive control of the state requires a level of political leverage that is entirely absent in the earlier decades of the data.
The audacity of it is just wild. But his tenure in the Senate is cut short. The table notes he was assassinated in September 1935.
Right.
However, his death triggers a new, highly specific mechanism of power transfer in the data, the spousal appointment.
Yes.
Following his assassination, his wife, Rose M. Long, was appointed to continue his term, and she was subsequently elected in 1936 to finish it.
Which demonstrates a prioritization of familial continuity over starting a completely new electoral cycle with an outside candidate.
And it is a pattern that repeats in a fascinating way. Fast forward in the table to 1972. You have Senator Allen Ellender, who was elected in 1936 and served continuously until his death in July 1972.
He's a very long run.
Massive. And the text notes that to fill his vacant seat, Elaine Edwards was appointed. And the specific phrasing in the note is crucial here. She was appointed by her husband to continue Ellender's term.
Right.
Her husband was the sitting governor at the time.
It creates a closed loop of executive authority. The governor bypasses the immediate voter base to fill a federal vacancy with his own spouse. It highlights how the mechanics of appointment can be utilized to keep political influence tightly consolidated within a very small circle.
This consolidation of influence brings us to the ultimate statistical outlier in the document, Russell Long.
Yes.
We spent so much time looking at the 1800s, where guys like Destrehan couldn't wait to leave after 28 days. Russell Long, who the text explicitly identifies as the longest-serving senator in the state's history, takes office in 1948 and doesn't leave until 1987.
That is 39 years in a single seat.
39 years.
That 39-year span redefines what the institution is. The data proves the revolving door slammed permanently shut. By the mid-20th century, a Senate seat had transformed from a temporary, often dangerous hardship post into a highly coveted, fiercely protected lifelong career.
Definitely.
Between Allen Ellender's 35 years and Russell Long's 39 years, the table visualizes a period of incredible, multi-decade calcification.
And running parallel to this shift in tenure length is the final major evolution we can track in the text, the complete realignment of party affiliations.
Right.
Tracing the party labels from the top of the grid down to the present day. And looking at this impartially, just reading the text as historical data, you see a perfectly preserved record of national political shifts playing out in a single state.
The shifting color blocks in the party column operate almost like a geological core sample of the American electorate.
It really does. At the very beginning, in the 1810s and 20s, every single name is labeled Democratic Republican.
Right.
Then, moving into the 1830s and 40s, that block splinters. You see labels like Jacksonian and National Republican, which rapidly solidify into the Whig Party.
Right, the Whigs.
You have Alexander Barrow, Charles Conrad, Alexander Porter, all strictly listed as Whigs.
Which perfectly maps the major fault lines of the pre-Civil War political landscape.
Exactly.
But after the Reconstruction era gaps we discussed, that diversity in party labels abruptly vanishes.
It turns into a monolithic wall. From James B. Eustis in 1876, marching straight through the massive dynasties of Ellender and Russell Long, and continuing all the way through the 1980s and 90s with John Breaux and Mary Landrieu, it is over a century of unbroken Democratic labels, next to almost every single entry.
That solid century of blue text visually represents the historical dominance of the Democratic Party in the post-Reconstruction South. It's a remarkable visual representation of regional political uniformity.
But the table captures one final massive pivot as we reach the modern era. Mary Landrieu, serving as a Democrat until 2015, overlaps with David Vitter, who was elected in 2004 as a Republican.
Right, the shift.
The color of the column definitively changes, culminating in the current delegation we noted at the start. Bill Cassidy and John Kennedy, both Republicans.
By simply following that one column, from the early Democratic Republicans through the rise and fall of the Whigs, the century of unbroken Democratic representation, and the modern transition to a Republican delegation, the text validates the utility of looking at raw data. You can trace 2 centuries of shifting political ideologies without reading a single paragraph of analysis.
So what does this all mean? We started with a Wikipedia article, a simple, rigid grid of names, dates, parties, and brief footnotes. But by actually unpacking the rows and columns, we traced a sweeping, deeply human narrative.
We really did.
We found the administrative chaos of early statehood, where politicians abandoned federal seats after a matter of weeks for governor mansions and European embassies.
Right.
We saw the grim physical toll of 19th century public service. We stared into the chilling 7-year void of the Civil War and the bizarre gridlocked vacancies of Reconstruction.
Complete breakdowns.
Yeah. We tracked the audacity of power moves by the Long family, the rise of spousal appointments, and a shift from a revolving door to multi-decade dynasties. And layered over all of it, a clear map of America's evolving political parties. The narrative is entirely there, right in the numbers.
It proves that data is never truly dry if you take the time to observe the patterns and question the anomalies. But looking closely at the specific pattern of how these tenure links expanded, this raises an important question for you to consider.
Always my favorite part. Where does the data leave us?
When we track the tenure links in this data, moving from politicians who couldn't wait to leave the chamber after a month to mid-century figures who held their seats for 4 unbroken decades, at what point does legislative stability cross the line into an entrenched aristocracy?
Wow.
And looking at this timeline, do we eventually reach a point where the incumbency advantage becomes so mathematically formidable that the idea of a competitive election is largely an illusion?
That is a phenomenal question. At what point does the stability we want from our institutions actually become the thing that prevents them from evolving? I love that.
It's definitely something to think about.
Well, we want to sincerely thank you for sitting down with us today. We know your time is highly valuable, and we hope this deep dive proves that taking a closer look at everyday sources can uncover incredible insights and profound historical context. Keep questioning the data in front of you, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.